What if your greatest strength is hidden in what you think is a flaw? Ancient Taoist philosophers believed that true peace and power come from a state of profound simplicity they called the uncarved block. This is not about having less for the sake of it, but about returning to your natural, authentic potential before the world starts carving its expectations into you. By the end of this journey, you will have a practical framework for finding calm and clarity in our endlessly complex world. We will explore why a tree deemed useless was left to grow majestic, how a master carver found his art by doing nothing, and what a butcher's blade can teach us about effortless skill. These stories hold a quiet rebellion against the noise of modern life. What part of your own life feels most in need of simplification right now? There is a story about a tree so twisted and strange it was considered an eyesore. In the ancient texts, a master carpenter and his apprentices walk through a vast forest seeking the perfect timber. They pass straight, tall pines ideal for pillars and sturdy oaks fit for beams. Then they come upon a giant, ancient tree. Its trunk is gnarled and full of knots, its branches grow in wild, unpredictable directions, and its bark is rough and uneven. To the carpenters trained to see wood only as material, this tree is utterly useless. It cannot be cut into planks, it would not make a straight pillar, and its twisted grain would ruin any fine carving. They shake their heads and move on, dismissing it as worthless. Yet this dismissal is the tree's salvation. Because it serves no purpose in their eyes, they leave it alone. While the straight, useful trees are felled one by one, this ugly, knotted giant is spared. It continues to grow, its roots digging deeper, its canopy spreading wider, offering shade to travelers and a home to countless creatures. Over centuries, it becomes a local landmark, a place of quiet reverence. Its very uselessness, by the narrow standards of the carpenter, becomes its greatest strength. It lives a long, peaceful, and majestic life precisely because no one found a use for it. This is a direct mirror of the uncarved block. The tree, in its natural, unaltered, and imperfect state, represents that original potential. The carpenters, with their axes and saws, represent all the forces in the world that seek to carve us into something useful, productive, and acceptable. They want to smooth out our knots and straighten our unique growth. The tree's so-called flaws, its knots and twists, were not weaknesses at all. They were its armor. They were the very things that marked it as unsuitable for being turned into a tool, and thus preserved its inherent nature. The moral here turns our everyday logic on its head. We live in a society that constantly measures value by utility and polish. We are told to optimize ourselves, to smooth out our rough edges, to become efficient and productive instruments. But this parable asks a quiet, revolutionary question. What if your quirks, your unconventional paths, the parts of you that don't fit neatly into a job description or a social mold, are not liabilities? What if, like the tree's knots, they are actually your protection? They shield you from being harvested by systems that would reduce you to a single function. Your lack of conventional utility in certain contexts might be the very thing that grants you the freedom to grow in your own unique way, to become something more ancient and substantial than a mere tool. It allows you to exist authentically, untouched by the relentless axes of expectation. This is not an argument for laziness, but for a different kind of value, one based on being rather than on being used. The master carpenter's dismissal of the knotted tree reveals one side of the uncarved block, the power of being left alone. But what happens when engagement is necessary? How do we act in the world without losing that essential, untouched nature? Another ancient story offers a breathtaking answer, this time through the hands of a legendary woodcarver. He was commissioned to carve a ceremonial bell stand for a lord's palace, a piece that would be seen by everyone. This was no small task. An ordinary artisan might have rushed to his workshop, sharpened his finest tools, and begun hacking away at the most impressive piece of timber he could find, imposing his vision upon the wood through sheer force of skill and will. But this carver did something that seemed to outsiders like doing nothing at all. He did not pick up a chisel. Instead, he began to fast, setting aside rich foods to clear his mind of clutter and desire. He went for long, solitary walks in the forest, not to select lumber, but simply to be among the trees. He observed their spirits, the way they grew toward the light, how the wind shaped their branches, the unique character in each trunk. He was not looking for a piece of wood. He was waiting to see the bell stand. After days of this quiet preparation, it happened. He stood before a particular tree, and in its raw, uncarved form, he saw the finished bell stand perfectly contained within it. All his subsequent work with chisel and mallet was merely the act of removing the excess wood that hid the form. He revealed what was already there, waiting to be seen. His genius was not in his forceful creation, but in his profound perception. This is the practice of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action. It is the art of aligning your effort with the natural flow of things, like a sailor who trims the sails to catch the wind rather than trying to row against the current. The carver's fasting and wandering were not procrastination. They were the essential work of emptying himself so he could become a clear vessel for perception. He had to quiet the noisy ego that shouts, "I will make a great bell stand," to hear the quiet whisper of the tree that said, "Here I am." His action flowed from a place of deep stillness and connection. The lesson cuts against our modern instincts of hustle and forced productivity. We often approach our projects, our goals, even our relationships like that ordinary artisan, armed with plans and sheer willpower, ready to force an outcome onto the raw material of our lives. We exhaust ourselves carving against the grain, but this story suggests a radically different path. What if, before you act, you first seek to understand the inherent nature of the situation? What if the solution to a complex problem is already latent within it, waiting for you to clear your mind enough to see it? What if your next creative breakthrough is not something you need to manufacture from scratch, but something you need to patiently, attentively discover? The bell stand was always in the tree. The carver's mastery was in knowing how to look. The carver found his art by seeing what was already there, but what does it feel like to move through the world with that same flawless perception? There is another story, perhaps the most famous of all, about a butcher named Cook Ding. In the court of a lord, Cook Ding was renowned for his work. But his true marvel was not the meat he prepared, it was his blade. After 19 years of service, his carving knife was as sharp as the day it was first honed. In a profession where blades are dulled daily by bone and gristle, this seemed impossible. The lord, astonished, asked him for his secret. Cook Ding set down his knife and explained. He said, "Ordinary butchers hack at the carcass. Their blades strike bone and ligament, needing constant sharpening and replacement. But he, Ding, did not see a solid, impenetrable mass. He saw the inherent structure. His attention was not on the ox as an obstacle, but on the spaces within it. He looked for the natural gaps, the subtle separations between tendon and bone, the hollows and channels where his thin blade could slide through without resistance. He did not force his way. He followed the way, the Tao, that was already present in the animal's anatomy. Over years, his mind and body had fallen into such perfect harmony with this practice that he no longer needed to look with his eyes. He listened with his spirit and followed the natural grooves. His movements were like a dance, his blade whispering through without ever meeting obstruction. This is the uncarved block in motion. It is that state of mind where skill becomes so internalized, so natural, that action feels effortless. The butcher's knife remained sharp because it never fought against the reality of the ox. It flowed with it. He did not impose his will upon the task. He cooperated with its intrinsic nature. Now, translate this to your life. Where are you hacking at the bone? Where are you applying brute force, gritting your teeth, and dulling your own spirit against a challenge that feels solid and immovable? Cook Ding's lesson is to look for the spaces. In a difficult conversation, the space might be a moment of genuine curiosity instead of accusation. In a complex project, the space might be the one simple next step hidden amid the overwhelming whole. In personal stress, the space might be the single breath you can take before reacting. These are the natural gaps in the resistance. They are always there. Our frustration blinds us to them. We see the ox, we see the solid block of problem, and we prepare for a fight. But mindful awareness, that quieted mind the carver cultivated, allows us to perceive the openings. When you find that groove and move through it, something shifts, the effort drops away. You are not struggling anymore, you are flowing. And just like the butcher's blade, your energy, your focus, and your peace are preserved. You achieve more with less wear and tear. This is the promise of approaching life not as a series of obstacles to conquer, but as a structure to understand and move through with grace. The path of least resistance is not about laziness, it is about supreme intelligence. That butcher's blade gliding effortlessly teaches us about action, but the fate of the trees asks a deeper, more unsettling question about value itself. We arrive at the core paradox. The straight pine, perfect for timber, is useful, and so it is cut down. The gnarled oak, good for nothing by the carpenter's measure, is useless. And so it is left to grow ancient and grand. In this simple contrast lies a radical critique of our entire world. Conventional usefulness is often a prelude to being consumed. The straight tree's value is its own death sentence. Its purpose is to cease being a tree and become a product. Its identity is erased to serve an external function. This is the fate of everything we label purely useful. It is harvested, processed, and exhausted. Its worth is transactional and temporary. Now look at the useless tree. By refusing to fit the template, it retains its sovereignty. Its value is intrinsic, found in its own being, its longevity, its provision of shade and sanctuary. It is not a means to an end, it is the end itself. The philosophy of the uncarved block turns this paradox into a guiding principle. It suggests that what society dismisses as pointless, what lacks a clear market function or a tidy label, often holds the most enduring and profound worth. Think of activities our culture sidelines as unproductive: daydreaming, a long walk with no destination, sitting quietly with a friend, not to network or solve a problem, but simply to be together. These are the knotted branches of a human life. They don't produce a report, generate revenue, or build a resume. Under the harsh light of utility, they seem wasteful. Yet, these are often the very moments where peace is found, where creativity sparks, where relationships deepen. They are the spaces where we are not being used, and thus where we can truly be. We are trained from a young age to prove our usefulness. We ask children what they want to be when they grow up, a question that equates identity with function. We hustle to optimize our time, monetize our hobbies, and turn every passion into a side gig. We carve ourselves into recognizable, acceptable shapes to fit the needs of the economy, of social circles, of family expectations. We polish away our knots to become smooth, efficient planks, but this relentless carving comes at a cost. It drains the vitality from our days. It makes us anxious, forever fearing we are not productive enough, not successful enough by the external metrics handed to us. The straight tree is admired right up until the axe falls. So what in your own life feels like that straight pine? What part of you are you over-carving, over-pruning, and over-managing in the desperate pursuit of being useful? Is it the hobby you abandoned because it wouldn't pay, the quiet morning ritual you sacrificed for an extra hour of work, the unconventional idea you dismissed because it wouldn't fit on a linear career path? Simplicity, in this Taoist sense, is not about owning fewer possessions, though that can be part of it. It is a strategic and liberating form of existence. It is the conscious choice to protect the parts of yourself that have no obvious purpose, to honor your own knotted, wild growth precisely because it cannot be easily used. It is the courage to exist for your own sake, to find value in your being rather than in your output. In a world that constantly demands you prove your utility, the most revolutionary act might be to cultivate a little sacred uselessness. So much of our daily frustration is a story we insist on telling ourselves. There is a parable about a man rowing his small boat across a wide, misty lake. The fog is thick, visibility poor, and he is moving with careful focus. Suddenly, out of the gloom, another boat strikes his own with a jarring thud. His immediate reaction is a surge of hot anger. His mind instantly constructs a narrative: that reckless fool, he is not paying attention, he did that on purpose. The man stands up, ready to shout, to curse, to confront the idiot who has disturbed his peaceful journey. But as the fog shifts slightly, he sees the truth. The other boat is empty. It has simply come loose from its mooring and is drifting unmanned with no will or intention of its own. In that moment, all his anger evaporates. He might even laugh at himself. There is no one to blame, so the blame and the fury that came with it simply have nowhere to land. This is the teaching of the empty boat. Our emotional turmoil, our rage, our deep sense of offense rarely comes from the event itself. It erupts from the story we layer on top of it. We are not upset by the drifting boat. We are devastated by the imagined careless boatman inside it. We attribute intention, malice, or disrespect where often there is only chance, clumsiness, or simple human error. The empty boat is a neutral fact. The insult is a fiction we authored. Now connect this to the uncarved block. A mind in that state of simple, natural awareness is itself like an empty boat. It is not projecting a complicated story onto the world. It is not populating every neutral event with imagined villains or personal slights. It perceives the thud, assesses the situation, and responds to what actually is. If the boat is empty, you simply push it aside and continue your journey. If there is a person, you can address them directly. But the key is that your inner peace is not held hostage by a phantom narrative. Your mind remains uncarved, unmarked by the unnecessary drama your own ego wants to create. The practical application here is immense because we live in a world full of perceived collisions. Your coworker sends a terse email and you spend the afternoon fuming, convinced it is a sign of their disrespect. But what if their boat is empty? What if they are simply overwhelmed, rushed, or unaware of how their words land? The driver who cuts you off in traffic becomes a personal enemy in your mind, but their boat is likely empty, a moment of distraction, not a targeted assault on you. Even in larger conflicts, so much suffering comes from our certainty about the other side's malicious intent. We armor ourselves against the story we have written about them. Adopting the empty boat perspective is not about becoming a passive doormat. It is about strategic emotional efficiency. It is the practice of pausing between the thud and the story. When you feel that flare of anger or hurt, ask a simple question: is this boat empty? Is it possible there is no malicious captain here, just a drifting piece of circumstance? This does not mean the collision is pleasant or that you should ignore real harm. It means you reserve your precious emotional energy for the battles that are real, not the phantoms you have invented. By letting go of the need to populate every event with intention, you reduce the daily friction of life. You stop carving grievances into your own mind. You begin to navigate the fog with a lighter heart, responding to what is actually in front of you, not to the frightening shadows your thoughts have painted on the mist. The empty boat, then, is not just something you encounter. It is a state you can cultivate within yourself, a simplicity of perception that leaves you unoffended by the random drift of the world. A rare seabird once landed in the courtyard of a temple in the ancient state of Lu. It was a magnificent creature, unlike any seen in that region, with plumage like polished jade and eyes like dark jewels. The local duke saw this as a celestial sign, a blessing upon his reign. He was determined to honor this divine visitor in the most splendid way possible. He ordered his servants to capture the bird, not to harm it, but to lavish it with every luxury his court could provide. The seabird was placed in a gilded cage within the grandest hall. Musicians played the most refined courtly music to entertain it. The duke hosted a formal banquet in the bird's honor, presenting platters of the finest minced meats and offering it wine from a ceremonial cup. He gave it everything he believed was fitting for a guest of such high stature. In 3 days the bird was dead. It had not eaten, had not drunk. It had simply stared, paralyzed with terror, at the ornate bars of its cage until its heart gave out. The duke, in his sincere desire to honor, had committed a profound act of violence. He never asked what the bird needed. He never observed its nature. He saw only a blank slate, an uncarved block, upon which he could carve his own ideas of hospitality, prestige, and value. He gave it complexity when it required simplicity, confinement when it required sky, human ceremony when it required the quiet freedom of its own world. This is the danger of overcarving in its purest form. It is the tragedy of applying our sophisticated solutions to things that thrive in utter plainness. We do this constantly, not out of malice, but out of a misplaced sense of care. A parent wanting the best for their child fills every hour with structured lessons and activities, carving the child's schedule into a masterpiece of productivity, not seeing the child's natural need for unstructured play and boredom, which is the soil of creativity. A partner wanting to show love buys extravagant gifts or plans elaborate surprises, carving their affection into grand gestures, while the other person quietly longs for the simple, uncarved gift of presence and attentive listening. We see a problem in our own lives, a feeling of emptiness, a lack of purpose, and our first instinct is to carve. We add more goals, more routines, more self-improvement plans, more possessions. We impose a complex framework of what a good life should look like onto the raw material of our experience. But what if, like the seabird, the core need is not for more, but for less? What if the answer is not a grand banquet, but an open sky? The seabird story is a lesson in humility. It asks us to pause our generous impulses and first observe. Before you offer your most elaborate solution, ask, what is the true nature of this situation? What does it actually require? True care often means restraint. It means providing the simple, spacious conditions for something to flourish according to its own design, not according to the blueprint of your ego. It is the difference between forcing a tree to grow straight with stakes and wires and simply giving it good soil, water, and sunlight, then stepping back to let it find its own uniquely beautiful shape. Where in your life are you playing the part of the duke, preparing a banquet for a creature that only wants to fly free? The duke's lavish banquet for the seabird is a cautionary tale of misguided care, but we live in an era of self-imposed banquets. Our modern world is a master carver, and its tools are relentless. They are the curated highlight reels on social media that make our own lives feel unfinished, the hustle culture that equates busyness with worth, and the endless pressure to optimize every facet of ourselves, from our sleep to our side gigs. This is the constant carving, the whittling away of our raw, authentic nature to fit a polished, productive, and perpetually improving template. Yet, in quiet rebellion, the principle of the uncarved block is making a powerful comeback, not as an ancient relic, but as a practical lifeline. You see it in the clean lines of minimalist design, where form follows function and every unnecessary ornament is stripped away, revealing the essential beauty of the object itself. You feel it in the growing desire for a digital detox, a conscious reclaiming of mental space from the noisy chisel of notifications and comparisons. It is present in the mindful consumption movement, the choice to buy fewer things but of better quality, things that serve a true purpose and bring lasting satisfaction rather than fleeting novelty. This is the heart of the slow living philosophy, a deliberate stepping off the treadmill of more, faster now. It is a choice to resist being carved. Consider the tangible joy of an unplanned afternoon with no agenda, where time is not a resource to be spent, but a space to be inhabited. It is the deep appreciation for a simple, well-prepared meal, eaten with full attention, where the experience itself is the purpose, not just fuel for the next task. It is the liberation of embracing a skill or hobby, like gardening or playing an instrument, purely for the love of it without the crushing pressure to monetize it, showcase it, or turn it into a personal brand. In these moments, you are not a project to be improved. You are a human being, experiencing being. This modern simplicity is not about deprivation or rejecting comfort. It is a strategic, conscious editing. It is asking, before you add one more commitment, one more purchase, one more goal, does this serve my essential nature, or is it just another stroke of the societal chisel? It is recognizing that every yes to something external is often a no to something internal, a little more of your uncarved block being shaped into something for someone else's use. The choice for simplicity, then, is an act of preservation. It is the decision to protect the wild, knotted, authentic core of who you are from being sanded down into a smooth, acceptable, and utterly exhausted plank. It is finding the courage to sometimes be, as the ancient tree was, gloriously and unapologetically useless by the world's frantic standards in order to remain whole. That story of the seabird shows us the cost of overcarving, but how do we actually stop the chisel in our own hands? How do we cultivate that inner uncarved block in a world that never stops demanding we shape up? The practice is less about adding a new self-improvement regimen and more about a gentle, consistent subtraction. It begins with the mind. Your mind is the primary carving tool, constantly judging, planning, comparing, and narrating. Meditation, in its simplest form, is the practice of setting that tool down. It is not about emptying your head of thoughts, but about changing your relationship to them. For just a few minutes a day, you sit and observe the mental chatter without engaging with it. You notice the thought that says you are not productive enough, and instead of believing it and carving your schedule into a frantic masterpiece, you simply let the thought drift by like a cloud. This creates a tiny gap, a space between you and the constant internal commentary. In that space, you are not the carver or the carved. You are the quiet block of wood itself, whole and at rest. This daily pause weakens the habit of compulsive mental carving and lets your natural, unforced awareness come forward. Next, reconnect with the original teacher, nature. Go for a walk without a podcast, sit by a stream and just listen. Watch how a tree does not strain to be a tree. It does not worry about its leaf production quota or compare its branches to the tree next door. It simply exists in a state of effortless being, following its innate patterns of growth and rest. Spending regular, device-free time in nature recalibrates your nervous system. It reminds your body and mind of a slower, more organic rhythm, one that operates on cycles, not deadlines. You start to remember that you, too, are a part of this natural world, not separate from it. Your essential nature is not a complex intellectual project. It is as fundamental as breath. Then there is the surprisingly powerful practice of intentional boredom. Our lives are engineered to avoid emptiness at all costs. We fill every waiting moment with our phones, every quiet evening with streaming services. But boredom is the fertile void where the uncarved block can reassert itself. Schedule time to do absolutely nothing. Sit on a bench, stare out a window, allow the restless mind to fidget and complain until eventually it grows quiet. In that quiet, something authentic often bubbles up, a forgotten memory, a creative idea, a simple sense of peace. This is your natural creativity and consciousness, surfacing when you stop drowning it in stimulation. It is the inner tree finding new growth in the open space you have cleared. Finally, embrace the art of subtraction on a practical level. Regularly audit your life. Look at your calendar and ask which commitments are nourishing my essential nature and which are merely carving me into a shape that pleases others. Look at your possessions and ask, does this object serve a true purpose or bring real joy, or is it just clutter that demands my energy? Look at your relationships and consider, do certain dynamics consistently chip away at my sense of peace and self-worth? Subtraction is not about loss, it is about creating capacity. Each unnecessary item released, each draining commitment declined, each toxic relationship gently distanced is like brushing away sawdust to reveal more of your true grain underneath. This is not a one-time purge toward a state of perfect, empty serenity. That is just another ideal to chase, another carving. The goal is the return. It is the gentle, forgiving practice of noticing when you have become overcarved by the world's demands or your own anxieties, and patiently sanding away those accumulated complexities. You return again and again to the essential feeling of being yourself before the story, before the hustle, before the need to be useful. You touch the uncarved block within, and from that place of simple wholeness, your actions begin to flow with a little more grace, like water finding its own course down the mountain. We have wandered through ancient forests and watched master carvers at work. We have seen a butcher's blade glide without resistance and learned from the fate of a bird that longed only for the sky. Each story, in its own quiet way, points back to the same profound truth. The deepest power we possess is not something we achieve through relentless carving and complex effort. It is the original, untouched potential we carry within, the uncarved block of our own being. This is not a call to abandon all action, but to change the source from which our actions flow. It is an invitation to act from a place of wholeness, not from a place of lack, to move with the current of life rather than exhausting ourselves rowing against it. The peace we seek is not found in adding more layers of polish and purpose. It is discovered in the courageous act of stripping them away, of returning to the essential grain of who we are before the world told us who we should be. So, as this journey closes, take a quiet moment to look at your own life. Where does it feel most overcarved? Which parts of your schedule, your identity, or your relationships feel like they have been sanded too thin by expectation and utility? And conversely, where might you allow for a little more of that sacred, useless beauty? Where can you protect a wild, knotted branch of your spirit simply because it brings you joy, not because it serves a function? In a world that is forever measuring, optimizing, and shaping, your most radical act of wisdom might be this: to sometimes stop carving, to sometimes just be the block. To find the immense strength in simplicity, the clarity in stillness, and the authentic freedom in being gloriously and unapologetically yourself. We would love to hear where you find simplicity in your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if these wisdom stories have resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into timeless ideas. Thank you for listening.